Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.
Welcome to all.
History is made of stories.
In this episode, we'll be talking about the impact of digital technologies on HR departments.
HR departments have to manage different types of risk related to the increasingly litigious and complex nature of society and risk specifically tied to digital technologies.
Exactly. We often hear that digital technologies can solve all our problems, but it's more complex when you look closely.
The digital world is a source of added complexity for HR departments. So learning to understand the digital era isn't just about seizing opportunities, it's also about understanding the risks involved for HR. What's the story?
That's right. It's important to understand how digital technologies make things more complicated for HR. We can look at it from several different angles.
First and foremost, digital technologies highlight the differences in pace between business and people by disrupting established models, making business harder to read than before.
And HR needs to be able to understand the changing business, to be able to adjust its own strategy.
So the gap between the speed and intensity of environmental changes within a company and the more leisurely pace of people and their ability to change is the first source of risk created by digital technologies.
The second impact of digital technologies is its unpredictable social consequences. We know that living in a digital world impacts individual and collective behavior, but we don't know exactly how. It's hard to identify and anticipate changes. We're all learning as we go.
Right, and that's a problem for HR departments. They have to manage these uncertainties and adapt quickly to shifts they notice, while managing the inertia of human relationships and their corporate framework.
Yes. And the unpredictable impact of digital technologies doesn't stop with employees. It also affects HR departments' own skills. The digital environment increases the risk that existing HR references and skills become obsolete.
You're right. The frame of reference for HR departments has dramatically shifted, inviting human resources professionals to approach topics from a big picture, interdisciplinary perspective, all while incorporating cutting-edge techniques and turning to professional fields quite distant from HR.
The third impact is on employee expectations. Digital technologies broaden horizons, raising employee expectations.
Teleworking, easy access to information, AdWord tools and more. These individual and collective expectations are kindled by the digital environment, and they're not always easy to meet for HR departments.
Particularly when HR is up against a rigid legal framework and a management team that turns out to be more inflexible than it seems.
Teleworking policies are a meaningful example. We still regularly see attitudes that belong to another time and which raise important questions that go far beyond the simple ability to roll out teleworking in terms of tools.
Exactly. And that's what makes things difficult for HR. They have to anticipate changes while managing expectations on both sides. That's a source of risk.
Last but not least, it's important to remember that digital technologies don't only make things more complex, they also help to open companies up to the world around them. Digital tools support freedoms that open a company's borders. Companies are no longer sealed off from the rest of the world, if they ever really were.
We can use teleworking again as an example of this openness with the generalization of BYOD. Bring your own device. While the fact that companies are less closed off is not a bad thing per se. Far from it, it does raise questions and expose HR to new risks. First and foremost, those tied to data protection.
To recap, digital technologies are a risk factor because 1. They highlight the different paces of business, which is always fast, and people in general, which is slower. 2. They have an unpredictable impact on behaviors and skills, which are increasingly difficult to anticipate. 3. Digital technologies increase employee expectations for HR departments. And 4. They lead to more openness on all levels, which isn't a bad thing per se, but which naturally increases exposure to risk. Is that right?
Exactly right. Way to make a long story short. Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.